Welcome to our brand new podcast, where two AI personalities dive deep into important topics. In today's episode, they discuss the key takeaways from the newly released mandatory buyer representation agreements and new legal changes for 2025. You'll get an engaging conversation between two AIs as they unpack the ins and outs of the latest regulations affecting California real estate. Whether you're an agent, a buyer, or just curious, this episode makes sense of the complex changes in an informative and entertaining way. Tune in and enjoy this fresh take on the latest in real estate. Links are in the description if you would like to read more about it, which I encourage. Well, let's get to it.
Today we're going deep on some new California legislation coming in the 2025 straight from the California Association of Realtors.
Oh yeah, this is going to be good. Always some interesting things happening over there in California real estate.
For sure. And today we'll be covering three big things: buyer representation agreements, foreclosure extensions, and even contractor exemptions.
Lots to unpack there.
There is. So let's jump right in with those buyer representation agreements. Starting January 1st, 2025, you'll need a formal agreement with your real estate agent for almost every transaction. No more just kind of casually house hunting.
Right. So that means no more, hey, let's just go look at some open houses this weekend, and all of a sudden you're in contract.
Yeah. This new law makes things much more official.
It does. And this is a pretty big shift that really clarifies the relationship between the buyer and their agent.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't even really know exactly what their agent is doing for them.
Exactly. And it also makes sure everyone's on the same page right from the start. And hopefully that helps prevent any misunderstandings or disputes later on down the road.
Oh, for sure. Because buying a house is already stressful enough.
You got it. No one needs extra drama when you're trying to, find the perfect place to live.
Totally. Now, this new law is interesting because it kind of creates this trial period of 3 months for the relationship between the buyer and the agent.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it.
Right. You get 3 months to see if they're the right fit for you.
Yeah.
Can they find you that perfect place? Do they get you? And they get a chance to prove themselves.
And after that, if both sides are happy, then great. You can renew the agreement. But the important thing is that it doesn't just automatically renew.
Right. You have the option to walk away after those first 3 months if you're not feeling it.
And this is true unless the buyer is, a big company like a corporation or partnership or an LLC.
So there are some exceptions for those more complex situations.
Exactly. Now, another big change with these buyer representation agreements is that they now require a lot more specific details to be spelled out in the agreement.
Okay, like what kind of details are we talking about?
Well, you've got to include specifics about the agent's compensation, like how they get paid and exactly how much it will cost the buyer.
Right. That's important. No one wants to be surprised by fees later.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the money. You've also got to outline the services the agent will be providing, when exactly the buyer needs to pay, and even a clause explaining how to end the agreement if it's just not working out.
So basically it's like, here's what I'm going to do for you, here's how you're going to pay me, and here's how we can break up if we need to.
Exactly. It's all about clarity and transparency. And any agreement that doesn't include all of these details is considered void, so it's not legally binding.
Oh, wow. So they really mean business with this new law.
They do. And to make things even more serious, agents who don't follow these rules could face some pretty hefty consequences. California is really putting their foot down.
Wow. So it sounds like the state is really serious about protecting buyers.
They are. And this really emphasizes how important it is for buyers to understand their rights and responsibilities when they're working with an agent.
So with all these new requirements, what should buyers be looking for in a buyer representation agreement? What are some key things to watch out for?
Well, like I said before, first and foremost, you want to make sure you really understand the agent's compensation structure. Like, how are they getting paid and how much is it going to cost you in the end?
Right, because those commission checks can add up.
They can. And don't be afraid to ask lots of questions. This is a contract you're signing, so you have the right to make sure it works for you and you feel good about it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we've covered the major changes coming to buyer representation. Let's shift gears now and talk about something that can be a little stressful for homeowners: foreclosure.
Right. This can be a tough topic, but the good news is that some new legislation is providing a potential lifeline for homeowners facing this.
Oh, that's good to hear. So tell me more about these new foreclosure postponement options.
Okay, so under this new law, if you're Facing foreclosure, you can get an extra 45 days to sell your property if you have a signed listing agreement with a licensed broker and the property is being publicly marketed.
So you need to be making a real effort to sell your home, and you got to have professional help doing it.
Exactly. And having a clear paper trail is also really important. So you have to actually send that signed listing agreement to the trustee, that's the person or institution overseeing the foreclosure process, and you have to send it by certified mail so you have proof that it was delivered.
I see. So it's not enough to just, tell them over the phone.
Nope. You need that official documentation, and California is very specific about how you have to deliver it. You can find all those details on the California Association of Realtors website, though.
Perfect. We'll make sure to link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
And one more thing to clarify, you can only use this 45-day postponement once, right?
Correct. It's a one-time opportunity to try and sell your home and hopefully avoid foreclosure.
Got it. So what happens if you need more time?
Well, there's actually another potential 45-day extension that you might qualify for. If you already got the first 45-day extension through a listing agreement, and you then secure a bona fide purchase agreement, you might be able to get another 45 days.
Hold on, back up a sec. What exactly is a bona fide purchase agreement?
Sure. So it's basically a legally binding agreement between a buyer and a seller that outlines all the terms of the sale, like a promise to buy the house.
Okay, so it's more than just a handshake deal.
Much more. This agreement has to include specific details like the buyer's name, the sale price, the closing date, and it has to be accepted by the designated escrow agent.
Got it. So it's all official and legally binding.
Exactly. And the purchase price in that agreement has to be at least equal to the unpaid balance on the property.
Okay, so no lowball offers if you're hoping to snag that extra extension.
Nope. And just like with the listing agreement, you have to deliver this purchase agreement to the trustee by certified mail with tracking information to prove it was received. And just like the first postponement, you can only use this one once.
Okay, so it's a one-time deal for each of those 45-day extensions.
Yeah, that's right.
So even in a really tough situation like foreclosure, taking strategic action and knowing about these new rules can buy you some time to sell your home and hopefully avoid a major loss.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding your options and acting quickly.
All right, so we've covered the big changes coming to buyer representation and how those facing foreclosure can benefit from these postponement options. Now let's talk about a change that could impact any homeowner planning renovations in 2025.
Oh, yeah. This one's exciting, especially for our DIYers out there. We're talking about changes coming to the Handyman Exemption.
Okay, fill us in on what's going on.
So right now in California, if you're doing a home improvement project that costs less than $500, you don't need a contractor's license. But starting January 1st, 2025, that exemption limit is increasing to $1,000.
Wait a minute, so you're telling me I can finally tackle that bathroom remodel myself?
Haha, well, hold your horses. While this is definitely great news for those who love DIY projects, it's super important to be realistic about your skills. Maybe that full kitchen remodel is still best left to the pros, but now you can finally fix that leaky faucet without worrying about permits.
Okay, so smaller projects I can handle, but maybe not major renovations unless I really know what I'm doing.
Exactly. And just to be clear, as long as the total cost of the project is under $1,000, you can advertise and do the work yourself, even without a contractor's license.
Awesome. So this could make some home improvements much more accessible and affordable.
For sure. But there's one important thing to remember when you're advertising your services, you have to clearly state that you're not a licensed contractor.
Gotcha. Transparency is key.
Yes, it's all about protecting consumers and making sure everyone knows who they're dealing with.
All right, so this change could be great for DIY enthusiasts, but are there any potential risks we should be aware of?
Well, of course. While this expanded exemption empowers homeowners to take on smaller projects, it's crucial to approach DIY with caution.
Right, just because you saw a YouTube video doesn't mean you're suddenly a master plumber.
Exactly. It's so important to assess your skills honestly and be realistic about the complexity of the project before you start tearing down walls.
Yeah.
If you're unsure about anything, it's always best to consult with a licensed professional.
Good advice. You definitely don't want your DIY project to turn into a DIY disaster.
Nope. Safety should always come first.
Okay, so in this first part of our deep dive, we've covered a lot. We've looked at the new buyer representation agreements, uncovered some potential lifelines for homeowners facing foreclosure, and even discussed the exciting and potentially risky expansion of the Handyman Exemption.
We sure have, and there's still more to discuss.
There is. In our next segment, we're going to step back and analyze the potential long-term implications of all these changes and what they could mean for the future of the California real estate market.
It's going to be fascinating.
Oh, for sure. We just spent some time getting into the nitty-gritty of these new California real estate laws, but now let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's important to not just know the rules, but to actually understand what those rules mean for you, whether you're buying, selling, or even just trying to keep your home in good shape.
Exactly. So what do you think these changes tell us about the direction California real estate is headed in, let's say, 2025 and beyond?
Well, what's really interesting to me is that these new laws aren't just random changes. They're part of a bigger trend that we're seeing all across California and even across the country.
Okay, so what kind of trend are we talking about?
It's all about consumer protection and transparency.
Okay, so kind of leveling the playing field and making sure everyone has access to the information they need.
Exactly,
Yeah.
especially in industries that can be, kind of complicated, like real estate.
Oh, totally. Buying or selling a house is a huge deal. It shouldn't feel like you're navigating a secret society.
Right. And California has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to protecting consumers.
Yeah, they're definitely not afraid to shake things up.
Yeah.
So how do you think this focus on consumer protection might impact the real estate market itself?
Well, one thing we might see is a more competitive market for real estate agents.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, with all this emphasis on transparency and accountability, agents will really need to prove their worth. They can't just rely on charm and a nice smile anymore.
So it's not enough to just be a good salesperson.
Yeah.
You actually need to be a real estate expert.
Exactly. And we might even see more specialization within the industry.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, instead of just being a general real estate agent, someone might focus on a specific niche or a certain type of transaction.
Oh, I see. Like an agent who specializes in helping first-time homebuyers navigate those new buyer representation agreements.
That's a great example. Or maybe an agent who's an expert in assisting homeowners who are facing foreclosure.
Okay, so finding your lane and becoming the go-to person for that specific thing.
Exactly. It's all about finding your niche and offering a truly valuable service to your clients.
Now, all this talk about agents, what about the impact on homeowners? Aside from that handyman exemption we talked about earlier, what other changes might they see?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is that these changes, especially the ones about foreclosure postponement, could encourage homeowners to be more proactive about maintaining and improving their properties.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about it. If you know you have a little bit of extra time to sell your home, even if you hit a rough patch financially, you're probably more likely to keep it in good shape.
That makes sense. You're not going to let things slide if you know you might need to sell soon.
Exactly. It's all about protecting your investment. And with that expanded handyman exemption, people might be more willing to tackle smaller repairs and renovations themselves, too.
Which could save them some money in the long run.
For sure. But again, always remember to be realistic about your DIY skills and know when to call in the pros.
All right, safety first. Okay, so we've talked about some potential positive impacts. Are there any downsides or challenges that we should consider?
Well, one challenge could be that these new regulations, while they're meant to protect consumers, might actually make the whole real estate process a little bit more complicated.
So more paperwork, more steps to follow.
Potentially. But remember, the California Association of Realtors has tons of resources to help both agents and consumers understand and navigate all these new laws.
That's great. They're like the real estate fairy godmothers.
Haha, exactly. And one more thing to keep in mind is that the long-term impact of these changes is going to depend on a lot of factors. How they're implemented, how they're enforced, the overall economy, all these things play a role.
So even with these new rules in place, there's still a lot we don't know.
Right. Real estate is a living, breathing thing. It's always changing.
Hmm?
So it's impossible to predict the future with 100% certainty.
True. But having a good understanding of these changes and their potential implications is just definitely a good place to start.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive is just a snapshot in time. The real key is to stay informed, be adaptable, and embrace the fact that the real estate market is always evolving.
Great advice. Okay, so let's wrap up this part of our conversation with a few key takeaways.
Sounds good.
Number one, these new laws are a big deal. They're part of a nationwide movement to empower consumers and create a more transparent real estate landscape. Number two, these changes are likely to make things more competitive for real estate agents who will need to really demonstrate their value to clients. And finally, number three, even with all these new laws and resources, it's still super important for both buyers and sellers to stay informed and seek expert advice when they need it.
Those are all excellent points. And before we move on, I want to highlight one more really fascinating aspect of these changes.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's all about the balance of power. It's shifting. In the past, real estate was often shrouded in mystery and, all that industry jargon that the average person couldn't understand.
It felt like you needed a secret decoder ring to understand what was going on.
Totally. But things are changing. Consumers today are savvier. They do their research, they compare their options, and they demand clear explanations.
Right. They're used to being in control and making informed decisions in every other area of their lives.
Exactly. And this shift is forcing the entire real estate industry to change too.
To become more transparent, more consumer-friendly.
Absolutely. And technology is a big driver of this change too. It gives consumers access to a ton of information and helps them feel more empowered.
Okay, so it's not just about these specific legal changes. It's a whole new way of thinking about real estate.
Precisely. And those who embrace this new reality, both agents and consumers, are the ones who are going to thrive.
All right, so we've covered a lot today. We looked at those upcoming changes to California real estate. We talked about the potential impacts, and we even zoomed out to consider those bigger trends that are driving this whole evolution.
We did. And before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more crucial piece to cover. Well, we've given you a lot to think about, but now it's time to connect it all back to you, the listener. How can you actually use these insights to make better decisions in your own real estate journey?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that in our final segment. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and now it's time to get down to brass tacks. What does all of this actually mean for you, the listener? How can you use this info to, really navigate the California real estate market like you know what you're doing?
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? All this knowledge is great, but only if you can actually apply it in the real world.
For sure. So let's start with those buyer representation agreements that we talked about. Remember, those are becoming mandatory in 2025.
Yeah.
So if you're even thinking about buying a house, you need to be really careful about which agent you choose.
Absolutely. You really want someone who understands all the ins and outs of these new agreements, someone who can hold your hand through the whole process.
Totally. So how can you tell if an agent is, up to snuff on all this?
Well, don't be afraid to ask them some tough questions. How do they plan to keep you in the loop? What's their communication style like? How will they handle negotiations? It's kind of like interviewing them for a job,
It is. You're hiring them to help you with one of the biggest decisions of your life.
Exactly. And speaking of big decisions, don't forget about those foreclosure postponement options we talked about. They could be a real lifesaver for homeowners who are facing tough times.
Totally. So if you're starting to stress about making those mortgage payments, don't freak out. Knowing about these options could buy you some time to figure things out.
That's right. It gives you a little breathing room to explore your options, whether that's selling your house, talking to your lender, maybe seeking some financial guidance.
It's like having an extra layer of protection.
Yeah.
And hey, while we're talking about saving money, don't forget about that expanded Handyman Exemption.
Oh, yeah. That could be a real game changer for DIY enthusiasts.
So now you can tackle even more projects without needing a contractor's license. Just remember those safety tips we talked about.
Right. Always be honest with yourself about your skill level. Some projects are best left to the professionals, no matter how tempting it is to DIY.
For sure. Better safe than sorry.
100%. And, even with all these new laws and all this information out there, real estate can still feel really overwhelming sometimes.
Oh, totally. So what advice would you give to someone who's just feeling lost and confused?
Honestly, go straight to the source. The California Association of Realtors, their website is like a real estate encyclopedia with tons of helpful resources.
Yeah, they've got everything from explanations of new laws to directories of qualified agents and other professionals.
Exactly. And remember, staying informed isn't a one-time thing. The real estate world is always changing, so make it a habit to check in with reliable sources on a regular basis.
Right. Don't wait until you're in the middle of a transaction to start learning the ropes.
Exactly. Keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the market. It's the best way to stay ahead of the game.
Well said. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully you're walking away feeling a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more confident about navigating the California real estate market.
Absolutely. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as real estate.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Nah.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, happy house hunting.